Number 4 in our discussion of George Orwell, his second nonfiction book, The Road to Wigan Pier, came out in 1936, and it's a book that's become quite notorious, perhaps, especially in Britain. I will describe how it came to be. So there was a group called the Left Book Club at this time, and it was run by a publisher named Victor Gollancz. Gollancz Publishing is still around. They've been reprinting science fiction lately. I think that's been fun. But at that time, they were very political, and they would commission books and send them out to the members of this leftist book club. Gollancz asked Orwell to go to the north of England, which was, seeing very high unemployment and poverty during the Great Depression, and look around and deliver a book. And Orwell agreed. Orwell was generally interested in direct experience, and that probably informed the success of his later fictions, is because he had actually gone to places and looked around and not taken things for granted or satisfied himself with secondhand reports. If his health had been better, it's very interesting to imagine what he would have done in the 40s and 50s at the start of the Cold War. Anyway, Road to Wigan Pier. Wigan Pier is a imaginary. It's not a real place. There's a real town called Wigan, and a pier, in the British sense of the term, is sort of like a pleasure boardwalk. And so the idea of Wigan having one of these is a bit of a joke. I'm not sure what the U.S. equivalent would be, but imagine if someone was sort of like, yes, we will go to Disney Toledo, or something, setting a spot known for pleasure and a spot known mostly for hard work. So Orwell goes to this area, and he especially spends time among coal miners, but he does a great deal of what we might call participatory journalism. He lives in a poor boarding house. He explores these small industrial towns that are not doing well, where there's lots of people living on the dole, and just sort of like tries to find out what's going on in the culture of these places during the time that he was there. You get the impression he spent not a year certainly, but more than just a week. He spent a fair amount of time in these places, perhaps in the reign of a couple of months, and he moved from one to the other. The first half of the book is his story of what it's like to be a working class Brit in these areas at this time, and it is even now really, really compelling. There's obviously been a lot of work by good writers who have tried to sort of tell the tale of poverty, some that they came from, others as sort of visitors from another culture. But even among these, I think this book stands out. Orwell was a very straightforward, clear writer, and he could describe things very directly. And he did a good job describing sort of the culture of poverty that sort of enervates and keeps people from doing even the little things that they could do to sort of improve their plight, like just leaving things so dirty, not changing linen, not cleaning food as well as they could, these sorts of things. And he does a little bit of suggesting that people could do a little more to help themselves, but in general he's aware that they're not deeply responsible for their plight, that it's they're just at the whim of these much larger societal forces. He does a good job describing the coal mines and just the raw physical difficulty of the work. He talks about how he came to realize just how thoroughly everything in his life depends on the power of coal. How without coal, there could be no British Empire, because there would be no steamships, there would be no trains. Without coal, they wouldn't have heat at night, and he goes on at length on just like the deep reliance of industrial civilization on coal, and thus on coal miners. I believe historians have now, come up with decent estimates of how many people have died in the coal mining that is, accelerated since the invention of the steam engine. So in roughly the last 250 years around the world, um, it's in the millions. And this is from accident. This isn't from kind of like long-term occupational diseases like black lung. It was just a staggeringly dangerous business, especially in the early days. There were just so many regular accidents, sometimes causing the deaths of dozens or even hundreds. And Orwell, he delves into that, and he um, explains why this is the work on offer. This is what people need to do to survive, and it's very affecting. There's one famous passage from this section of the book where he's on a train, and he's going from one of these little industrial towns to another, and the train is not going very fast, and he can sort of watch out the window, and he sees a young woman who is trying to clear a clogged downspout. And he said there's just this look of hopelessness on her face, this awareness that her hands are red, and she's not that old, but she looks older, and just this awareness that her life is just going to be dealing with one broken bit of work after another, just one little bit of misery after another. It's romantic, it's not accurate perhaps, but it's very affecting as a piece of literature. And it might fall into, I don't know, manifesto journalism, the kind of journalism that does not lie, but that openly seeks to enlist your sympathies and your actions in a certain direction. By this point, it seems pretty clear that Orwell was something like a socialist, that he was looking for sort of solutions to the problems of poverty and imperialism, problems that had inspired his earlier work, and now he seems to have been looking for something to actually do about it. He eventually said, that he was on the side of democratic socialism, and everything he wrote was in favor of that and against, the alternatives of like fascism or brute nationalism. Early on, though, he still comes from this kind of Tory conservative background, and he's still sort of feeling it out. He was never orthodox about anything for any group, but you can feel him reaching for something. Like something has to be done to help these people, and the people who were talking about helping those people in the 30s were socialists. So he's learning some things about socialism. But what makes the book special, the second half. So if he had just turned in the first half of the book, perhaps expanded on it, it would be remembered by a few people. But in the second half of the book, he sort of turned the book into a political document. And what he did was, and apparently he very much surprised his publisher, Victor Galans, and Galans even hurriedly put together an apologia for the second half of the book for the subscribers. Because what the Orwell did in the second half was attack the left in a book for the Left Book Club. He took on the left of his time for being a bunch of weirdos. I don't think that's too harsh. Just being a bunch of weirdos that it would be impossible for the working classes, who they supposedly want to help, that it would be impossible for the working class to respect them because they were just weird. They were exotic, eccentric nut jobs drawn to like strange fringe ideas and causes, as Orwell understood them. So he upbraided the left, the very people who were going to read his book, for being into like things that Orwell found weird, like vegetarianism or atheism, or being too much for like gender equity, or just being weird, like wearing weird clothes and eating strange food and not just sort of going along with the common culture of their country. And I think he did hit something important here, which is that there is a tendency in leftist groups. First, if you're pulled towards the left in your society, and we mean this, say, in the last couple hundred years, if you're pulled towards the left, you're obviously not satisfied with the status quo, and so as part of being pulled towards the left, you'll probably be pulled towards other minority movements. It sort of comes together. Once you begin to question one, you start to question more, and some of them are going to appeal to you. And you get this situation where the outward markers of your life and the causes that you join are separate you from the mainstream of your society. The way you dress, the words you use, the songs you sing, the food you eat, they pull you away from the common culture of your country, if your country can be said to have a common culture, and I guess most of them can. Orwell expanded on this in a later essay about England. He talked about how during the 30s, this is kind of like his, so it's maybe 7-8 years after Road to Wigan Pier, during the 30s, that the leftist intellectuals basically became unpatriotic, and they made a point of running down Great Britain, of treating the things that people in Great Britain liked as just automatically foolish and worthy of ridicule. He has some phrase in the essay where he says these people take their cooking from France and their opinions from Moscow, and so that instead of creating an active political force that might improve their country, they go too far and they become essentially an exclusive coterie, just sort of a self-diagnosed elite of sorts who enjoy running down their homeland. This is an ancient criticism of movements we might call leftist, which is that they separate themselves from their society, their societal values, not out of a desire to improve those values or to improve their society or to extend those values or point out blind spots, but as a way of sort of making themselves important, as a way of making themselves feel special, like only they know the real deal, the real score. They learn these kind of like specialized terminologies and use them to hold the rest of their society at arm's length. So, they study Marx. Well, no one else is going to study Marx, and so then when you start talking about Marx, no one knows what you're talking about. And you're left to feel very smart and important, and they're left to feel that you're a prig and a jackass. Orwell is looking for some way to actually improve his country, and of course he lands more on what we might call the welfare state, or he called it democratic socialism, but I think he assumed that democratic socialism would include a reasonable amount of just kind of like patriotism, of a desire to see your country and its peoples do well, and not to mock a lot of what it had created culturally or politically, even though that culture and politics were flawed, but to be drawn to improve them. This isn't very controversial, but certainly to go on at length about it, because he went on at length about it in Road to Wigan Pier. To go on at such length about it, especially to people who are supposed to read it, was unusual. Let's put it that way. There isn't usually that much scathing self-criticism, especially from someone who had only joined the left relatively recently. It's not like he grew up with it. Of course, some ways his schooling, his elite upper crust schooling, and then his work in the imperial police apparatus probably positioned him well to see things that are, more hidden from people who just grow into a certain political position, who grow into it with a lot of unchallenged assumptions. Since he came to it by such an unusual route, he was able to, in his opinion, see things that the left was hiding from itself. I think there's a lot to be said for that position. It is true that people tend to fall into the habit of just forming coteries and finding like-minded people, and then that's enough. And as long as they're left reasonably alone, they're fairly happy with that situation. They don't want to really take on the responsibility of improving the wider society and making compromises with their beliefs and learning to find some things that they can enjoy um, with people who they consider sort of their cultural and political opponents, but at least to find something that they can um, that they can all agree on, some common language, some common culture, some common stories. And Orwell was very much in favor of finding something like that for England, and that's a theme that runs through all the rest of his work into 1984, which is kind of his masterpiece, and we'll probably talk about it at the greatest length once we get there. 4 more books to go, though. So Road to Wigan Pier is a pretty fascinating political document, and I would say it is the deeper start of his political writing, because his prior novels included major political themes but had still been primarily novels, and Down and Out in Paris and London, of course, is more of a sort of a social journalism than direct political. This is like the advent of Orwell as the real political writer who really wants to influence the politics of his own time. And from here, he started to pick up much more overt political journalism and review writing and commentary. He became more active in those circles, so that when the British Labour Party began to put together the ideas that would eventually lead it to take governmental power at the end of World War II, Orwell was firmly in that camp. Like, he was connected to those people, and he shared ideas and concepts, and provided criticism of what they were doing. But this is where it started, with this very interesting combination of top-notch manifesto journalism. Has anyone invented that phrase? I'm going to trademark it if no one else has invented that phrase, because I think it's good. Dang it. And manifesto journalism and scathing critique of the left as a bunch of unpatriotic weirdos. If this sounds familiar, it really ought to. Even in the U.S., we've had these forms come into play, and it is definitely not the end of those critiques. And Orwell does it pretty well, and in a fun way. Again, just direct, straightforward, easy to understand. I don't believe that I've told the whole story. I believe, to Orwell experts, there's more depth behind the story of how the book came to be, but that's, to me, the essential element of it. This is Orwell joining the political fray directly and staking out a position, which he would then continue to develop later, also in his private correspondence and in his replies to other political writers. This is Orwell moving into becoming an opinion-making force in the world in a more direct way than the novelist or the social commentator, even, who generally aim at sort of building, deeper, long-lasting sympathies than in trying to invoke direct change or trying to provoke direct, immediate action. All right, so we are plowing through these. The next book is Orwell's third novel, A Clergyman's Daughter, and we will get to that momentarily. Momentarily? No, that's the wrong word. We'll get to that next time.